Okay, so the point of this little video will be to go over the advantages of dollar value LIFO. That's the idea. We covered it in class today, but we didn't really get involved in explaining why it's important and why it's so popular. And that's what I want to go through. And what you should do in order to really test yourself and see how well you're following everything is you really should take the principles I say here, make sure you understand it. If I don't explain the whys, ask yourself why it works. Look at what you do for dollar value LIFO. Look at the examples we went through in class and see if you understand how the dollar value LIFO gives us the advantages that we're going to discuss. So under dollar value LIFO, what we're doing is, unlike other LIFO methods, we are not following the actual quantity of goods. So usually the LIFO method is tracking units. The good news about dollar value LIFO is we do not track that. We track value, hence the word dollar value, and we track it in layers. Each, as we saw in class, each year becomes a layer. So we track value. So, and each layer is referred to as a pool of the inventory bought or added that year. It's considered a pool of new inventory. That's the concept of what those layers. When we add a layer, it's new ending inventory that we've added. So since it's not based on the count of items or units, as here, and it's based on dollar value of those items, since that's the case, we have several advantages over the other regular ways of doing LIFO. First of all, under normal economic conditions, when prices are rising over time, which is a terrific arena of economic developments with which to use LIFO, because it creates a higher cost of goods sold and lowers the tax when compared to the first in, first out, the FIFO method. When you develop the older units inside the buildup of the older inventory that's not being recognized as cost of goods sold under the LIFO method, as we learned, when you go and you dip into those through a liquidation or start liquidating inventory, that creates a artificially high gross profit because of the old costs of those items buried in that LIFO inventory. The dollar value minimizes that liquidation because all the items you purchase throughout the year belong to the same inventory pool. That means that the only time you liquidate a pool is when the year ending inventory is less than the beginning, after correcting for the inflation. That's what we do every year. We correct for the inflation. So, for example, we saw in class where the items bought in one year belong to a pool, so that we're not selling out old items as we liquidate those items. If we separately identify the items when they're sold. Let me give you a better example here. If we're doing it by units or items that are left in inventory, so they're in inventory, when we go to sell out that listing of items, so we have all kinds of units. We have units for A and B and C and D, and we develop all kinds of subunits of the inventory. These are all like subunits of inventory representing different products that we keep in the old inventory until sold. under a LIFO method, true, but we keep them in the inventory. When A is no longer a product that's being sold, maybe it is discontinued. So when that happens, I'm going to spell this wrong, I know it, so just ignore the spelling. When it's discontinued, you know what I mean, then A, all the old inventory left in A, all the old A has to be coming out, meaning liquidated, and that creates that lowering of the cost of goods sold, not really real, and it's sort of like recapturing all the income you deferred on it through the LIFO method. Less than desirable. And usually in the retail world, eventually all items get discontinued in some manner and liquidated. All units do. The advantage of the dollar value is that these pools or layers are done yearly, and the only time you dip into these pools or layers is, as we saw in the class example, when the particular year in question, say 2000X, when that year's inventory, after adjustment for inflation, actually does go down. That's the only time we dip into an older layer. And the way we dip into it, as you saw in the demonstration in class, is we go to the most recent layer first. And the most recent layer has, in periods of steadily increasing prices, doesn't have the lowest cost per unit in there. We don't go and take out a whole unit like we do here where we're doing LIFO by units. Here we're just doing it by layers or pools of dollar amounts. So we go to the most recent layer, and that's not as bad as if we do it by the units, because if you do it by units, for sure you're going to get to some really old inventory that was stuck in there at really low prices. But going to the most recent layer, that's what I'm missing, the word recent. Okay, we go to the most recent layer of the past, and the way we did it, again, to illustrate, we had 2009, 10, 11. We developed a pool here. We developed that was level 1. We developed another level here. That was level 2. And then we saw a downturn where the inventory went down in year 11. And how we recouped is we went first to layer 2, took some out of there, took some out by dollar amount. We didn't get to layer 1 because the reduction did not get us all the way back to layer 1. So it softened the blow of what the old LIFO costing inventory could have been if we did have to, let's say we did have to pull out of layer 1. That would have been more costly to do. So if we had to go to year 2009, like we might have had it done when we were doing units, the cost of goods sold would have gone even lower than it otherwise did. Okay, so I hope you see that. That's important to see the argument for that. All right, that's one advantage of dollar value LIFO, and that explains why it is very popular for this just reason. If there wasn't any other reason, it would still be very, very popular. There is another advantage, and that is it's easier to do this than to tracking the units. That's for sure. It's just an easier, ask anybody in the inventory business and they'll tell you that dollar value LIFO is less costly, less onerous, less trouble to keep track of, because you're keeping track of a year's purchase in dollar amounts only. True, you're still going to make a physical count at the year end to check things. You're always going to do that. That's for control purposes. But the dollar value LIFO method allows you to determine the proper cost without referring to any flow assumptions of the specific inventory units. So in other words, because of the fact that we don't worry about the individual units like we're showing up here, the whole system is just easier to administrate. We're only worrying about the quantity, the dollar value that is per year. So it makes life easier in applying LIFO. A third advantage is that you can set up pools under the dollar value LIFO, and when you use the regular LIFO, you're doing pools of inventory items by unit, of course. And when you do that, you've got to keep track to make sure that the pool for units A stays consistent, B stays consistent, C, and so forth. However, whichever numbers of pools of units you create to keep track of inventory under the LIFO, you've got to specifically follow the units in there. And that's harder to do. So that's maybe just the same reason as item 2, is just easier to administrate. But it can't be missed on the fact that with units you're creating pools as well, but that's another complexity of the situation with dollar value LIFO versus or regular LIFO versus dollar LIFO. Here, not only are you watching the units inside each pool, but you've got to be careful what goes in. I suppose that's the third reason, is you're dividing up reasons 2 and 3 as with units, you're watching both what goes in and what comes out. And that's part of the complexity that you don't have when you're dealing with dollar value LIFO. All right, that's about all I have to say. You may have come up with some other reasons why dollar value LIFO is preferred, but these are the main ones. And so I hope that this added some level of appreciation for why we cover it in class and why accountants dreamed it up in the first place.